let me introduce the speaker. We have Ed Johnsonbaugh. He's an educator with Penn State Extension, based in Westmoreland County, Southwest Pennsylvania, and he focuses on renewable and alternative energy. He joined Penn State a few years ago, but prior to that he spent 25 years in the electric utility industry in a number of roles, and which included these regulatory affairs, and so he had a lot of meetings with public utility commissions across the region, not only Pennsylvania, Maryland, or New York, Ohio, West Virginia. So from those experiences with these commissions, he learned a lot about the value of monitoring and changing regulatory landscape in terms of energy use and how they interpret the laws. The commission is responsible for interpreting the laws of the state. And so there's been some changes, and so it's quite timely. Today's topic, focusing on renewable portfolio standards and regulatory misconduct. There's a recent changes to the interpretation of the law that was passed nearly 10 years ago. That law, and I'm sure Ed will get into it, was meant to reinvigorate the market for renewable energy. Of course, we're interested in biomass, so I'd be looking forward to hearing what Ed has to say about these changes and what the implications are for our biomass markets. Thanks, Ed. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And I apologize for the delay there getting rolling here, but I think we're working now. So let's take a look at what I have to share with you today. Everybody's probably heard about renewable portfolio standards, and I'm here today to try and give you some perspective to tell you about why you ought to care about these rules and these legislative activity that have taken place in most of the states, in all of the states that we're working with in the new bio area. And the real purpose of these setting up a renewable portfolio standard was to allow these new entries, or this re-entry into the marketplace of renewable energy, to establish a foothold and compete against the traditional fossil fuel technologies that dominate the market. So the mechanism here is to create a demand for renewables, and I know we have a focus on the biomass side of this, but it's really pointed at all renewable technologies, and we're going to talk about how that foothold gets established, or how it was anticipated, and that it would be established, and then we're going to take some time and look at a proposed rulemaking that's going on in Pennsylvania right now. Matter of fact, it was just published in the Pennsylvania Register on Saturday, July 5th, so it's really only officially 2 days old, or 3 days old, but just looking at RPS laws that are on the books, of course, New Jersey was an early player in the renewable portfolio standard world, and probably have the most advanced market. They've got a very big emphasis there on solar, but there's also room for expansion in both the biogas and biomass world. Maryland also has a renewable portfolio standard piece of legislation that's in force, as does the state of New York. Ohio also has one, and it, however, is recently been modified by the legislature in the state, and I believe that was signed by the governor just in the last month here. So this emphasizes the point that I'm making about what's going on in Pennsylvania, other states are looking at these requirements and they're making adjustments. Quite frankly, the work that was done in Ohio wasn't worth the legislative effort, in my opinion. But they've gone and modified the requirements there, and the newcomer to the renewable portfolio world is the state of West Virginia, who just passed a law. I want to say it's been a little over a year ago. They had a law go into effect. I'm not very familiar with it. As you'll probably get a sampling of the work that, or the effort in here in Pennsylvania, there's enough to keep track of just by riding herd very closely on one state. But this renewable portfolio standards, or RPS, and I threw in there the initials RFS for the renewable fuel standards, which most of us may be more familiar with, establish market minimums. So where there was no market prior to the passage of these legislative efforts for renewable fuels, liquid fuels, or in the case of the RPS side of this, electrical generated electricity generated from renewable energy. These two markets were established in the states that have passed these kinds of laws. The RFS, of course, is a federal standard. So we know when we go to the gas pump to fill up our vehicle for buying gasoline, you often see a note on the pump that you may contain, the gasoline may contain up to 10% ethanol. And that is RFS, or Renewable Fuel Standards, in action. So where there was no guaranteed market for ethanol prior to that legislative effort, today there is. And the RPS on the state level, Renewable Portfolio Standards, established a similar minimum market for electricity generated from renewable resources. Now, they don't start off, these legislative efforts don't start off full bore. They ratchet up over the years. In the case of Pennsylvania's law, it went into effect in February of 2005, and it meets its goal in the year 2021. So we're still 7 years off here to the date that the legislative set that the full force of the legislation would be in place. So they phase in over time, and they create this market. Now you might ask, well, what relevance does this have to the new bio effort, and how do I take advantage? How could I possibly take advantage of a renewable portfolio standard? Well, I think in the time that we've been working on this project, one of the things that's become evident to most people that I've heard in discussion is that there really is no existing market for large volumes of biomass. And it's very difficult. We've got that chicken-egg conundrum going here, where do we get farmers to plant large volumes of it without a market, or do we get a market before we have the capacity to supply that market? And in my view of the world, the Renewable Portfolio Standard laws in the states that we're working in create a ready-made market, a guaranteed buyer in most cases, for every kilowatt hour that you can produce, and document that you've produced it with a renewable energy, a qualifying renewable energy resource. So we've got this market. Ed says there's a market. Well, I don't know anything about this market. I threw this slide together here to just put in perspective what the total market size is for just the state of Pennsylvania by the time we reach the year 2021. And we're going to look at the total kilowatt hours that were sold in Pennsylvania. The most recent readily available number was the year 2012. So we can see by this that there were 223, 419, 715 megawatt hours of electricity consumed within the borders of Pennsylvania in the year 2012. So, so what's a megawatt hour? Well, a megawatt hour is 1,000 kilowatt hours. So and most of us buy our energy on our residential electric bills, of course, in kilowatt hour values. So if we take this number and multiply it by 1,000, we can get a feel for just how many kilowatt hours were consumed in that year. But then we look at the next line and we see that the RPS in Pennsylvania by the year 2021 needs to be 8%. 8% of the megawatt hours consumed in the state by the year 2021 needs to come from a qualified renewable energy resource. That, if we use the kilowatt hours or megawatt hours sold in 2012, calculates out to over 18 million megawatt hours. So that's a lot of energy that while it's only 8% of the market, it's still a large volume of energy. Just pulling a number out of the air, what's the value of that in the wholesale energy market today? If we think in terms of kilowatt hours, let me back up and say I used $50 per megawatt hour. Well, that equates to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you're a residential customer, I see some folks from around the state, but also out of state, you're probably paying somewhere between 8 and 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So this is a reasonable number, 5 cents a kilowatt hour or $50 a megawatt hour. That crunches out to almost $1 billion marketplace for energy just annually, just in the state of Pennsylvania. So if you're going out to sell biomass and you wanted to make sure there was a sizable market for the energy that you produced, you convert your biomass into, jumping into a almost $1 billion marketplace is probably a safer bet than a lot of things that you could direct your efforts toward, especially because the Renewable Portfolio legislation, as I said previously, requires that the public or the regulated electric distribution companies in your state or any competitive generation provider that is selling electricity in your state meets the minimum standard. In this case, for Pennsylvania, by the year 2021, it will be 8%. Some states have higher minimum standards, and of course, across the country, some states still have none. But it is a sizable, as you can see, market. So qualifying technologies on the forest and agriculture side, we've got biomass and biogas opportunities, and beneath those headings, of course, we can think of the different applications that would apply, so long as the output in some case or in some characteristic is electricity, because we're to participate in this marketplace, to sell back to the electric distribution companies and the competitive energy providers, we have to be trading in electricity. On the other category, of course, are the more commonly or more frequent uh, observed technologies: solar, wind, in some places small-scale hydro is an application, and everybody's sweetheart, of course, is fuel cells. So in Pennsylvania, we've had this law in the book for what will be um, 10 years by next February. And the commission's role when this law was passed was to implement the plain language of the law and not to hide behind new definitions or determinations of legislative intent. And that's talk about two words with that are loaded. Legislative intent is cover language for the staff and the commissioners and primarily the staff, but also the commissioners at the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, using tarot cards or a Ouija board to understand, based on the language of the law that was actually written, what the legislature actually intended. And they found, by doing this, a great deal of latitude in how they can look at what was not just what was originally interpreted by members of the commission in the 10 years previous, but back at the legislation itself and say, well, what the commission or what the legislators really meant was, and they come out with some new definition or some abridged definition of what was previously accepted definition. So I put here as an example in the, and I'll just read it, a customer generator, and this was in the original legislation, is a non-utility owner, operator, and operator of a distributed generation system. So this word utility, the commission has focused in on now, and decided that they need to redefine the word utility, and then when we attach the prefix non to it, well, we can get a new meaning out of that we didn't really understand before. And what they've decided that means in their proposed new rulemaking is that it is one who is not in the business of selling electricity to the grid. So that's a very, very important redefinition of this, in that while the Renewable Portfolio Standard was set to create this marketplace that displaces the fossil fuel electricity on the grid with renewable or electricity from renewable resources on the grid, what the Commission is saying here is it's really not for people who just want to sell renewable energy to the grid. It's rather confusing that they would move in that direction. So what does that redefinition, what's the outcome of that? Well, the outcome is that you cannot be a customer generator whose goal is to produce renewable electricity and use the net metering rules, which are very important, to sell renewable energy back to the grid. You will be prohibited from doing so. So if you want, the alternative is you set up your renewable energy distributed generation system, you consume the vast majority of that electricity behind the meter, and on occasion some flows out to the grid, and predominantly though the flow of that electricity is from the grid, and they're really getting into fine-tuning this and eliminating the opportunity for projects like we are contemplating that would take advantage of the net metering rules, which allow these projects uh, to compete in the marketplace. And briefly, what net metering means is that a customer generator, a qualified facility, can is interconnected to the grid, and it can push electricity to the grid, and it can receive electricity from the grid. So we have bidirectional metering, and the interface of the trade-off of those kilowatt hours are at, in Pennsylvania, the full retail rate of the kilowatt hour. So I previously had mentioned that you're probably paying somewhere between 8 and 15 cents a kilowatt hour for the states that we have represented here. That means that the generation from these qualified renewable energy generators is priced at that full retail rate. So not only is there a market for renewable generation in theory, there's a market at the full retail cost. So it's the high end of the cost of electricity. But the Commission then moves on through this proposed rulemaking that they've put together, and they've come up with some other pet peeves, I guess, that they have, and we're going to touch on those. And something that may cross through your minds here as I talk about these problems that the Commission has decided they need to resolve is, what brought this on? Why did they decide after 10 years that they needed this refinement? And I can honestly tell you, after contemplating that question for months, as this proposal was originally made public back in February, I haven't any idea what the impetus is or what they're really trying to fix, because there is no detriment to the rate-paying customer, nor is there a loss for a electric distribution company who has a regulated rate of return, a guaranteed regulated rate of return. So everybody's made whole out of all of this. I don't know what the goal of these redefinitions are, but let's take a look at a couple more that would definitely impact the viability of establishing a bioenergy type facility that generated electricity to net meter in the Pennsylvania marketplace. And I would point out that up until this proposed rulemaking goes into effect, the rules that we're going to look at exist in the prior state, in the state that you are allowed to take advantage of them. I put the 110% rule here and called it the slippery slope rule because a few years back, the Commission, in their wisdom, looked at the industry in the marketplace where a new business model in the world had developed, in which third-party project owners were doing deals with electric customers, many of them institutional electric customers like schools and hospitals and other institutions like that, who didn't have the upfront money to finance their own project. So they made deals with third-party system owners who would come in and build the project and sell the electricity to the host entity, the school district or the hospital, and and take advantage of the net metering rules to push kilowatt hours back to the grid when demand at the facility was low. And the commission, for some reason, decided they didn't like that setup. So, and for the reason that these third parties could come in and put in much bigger systems than the facility actually needed. So they established a 110% rule, and when they did that, they swore on the proverbial stack of Bibles that this was a one-time deal. They were only going to limit this to third-party ownership arrangements, and not to worry about it, that this was very limited application, and this was going to fix some problem that they saw that nobody else realized. So they instituted what's called the 110% rule. Now, a few years later, in their infinite wisdom, they've decided that this was such a great thing that they've proposed that no system owner, whether it be a third party that would own the system or the customer, the electric customer at the site themselves, nobody's allowed to install more than 110% of the capacity that they would need to supply all of their electricity needs. So, when you think about that, because systems don't operate 100% of the time, and load from year to year depending on heating and cooling requirements, whether it's a hot summer or a cold winter, and expansions or revamping of energy use within a facility, to know from year to year exactly how many kilowatt hours you'll use next year is for most entities is a rather difficult calculation to make. But they don't want you to install more than 110% of the generation that you would need. So if you're looking at doing a biomass project where you would perhaps sell heat in the form of steam to a prison or a college steam system for heating buildings, for example, the electrical component of that part of the facility cannot exceed this 110% rule if these proposed rule changes go into force. So any customer generator who wants to build a system larger, they want to be in the business of selling electricity, they'll find out that the only thing they're allowed to do is zero out their electric bill. And if they would go any larger than that, they would be prohibited from doing so. So, when we think back and at the goal of achieving 8% of the state's electricity production or consumption from renewable resources, and there being penalties for not achieving those goals, you might look at this rule that the Commission has proposed and ask yourself, why are they shooting themselves in the foot with something like this to actually achieving the goals that the legislation set out to and mandated that the Commission oversee and take steps to make sure that they achieve those goals? To that extent, it makes little sense. Another very important rule that's in the original legislation and was specifically designed for the agricultural world is called virtual metering. Now, virtual metering takes into consideration that, for example, a large farm operation may have several accounts spread out, along a proverbial country mile. And if they had qualifying renewable energy generation at one location, they may be producing more than they need to zero out the electric bill at that location. Uh, Virtual metering permits them to take that excess generation and apply it against the consumption at more than one additional account, so long as those accounts are within a 2-mile radius of the account where the kilowatt hours are generated. Seems to make a lot of sense to the casual observer. This means that if you had, for example, a biodigester at a dairy operation, but you had grain drying facilities or dairy processing facilities some distance away, you'd be able to take the excess kilowatt hours and hand them to those other connections and get full retail value for each one of those kilowatt hours. But under this revision, that biogas or methane digester would have to have some other load connected to it that is what here's another new term, that is non-generational, meaning that it doesn't support that load, that lighting or motor load or whatever the process is not directly connected to the production of the energy. So you couldn't go across the street from your dairy operation and build a standalone plant to produce electricity and heat for your dairy operation and pump the heat across the street and sell the kilowatt hours into the grid, or apply them to some other account, some other associated account under these new rules. So this regulation or proposed rule significantly puts a damper on anybody going out and building a biomass combined heat and power facility, because typically those facilities are standalone. They exist to convert the biomass, whether it's a single burn and generate electricity facility, or if it's a facility designed to take, say for example, the lignin from some other process and combust it and produce electricity and heat for the operation. Those projects will be off the table. You won't be able to do that and take advantage of these new rules, or take advantage of the benefits that the law from 10 years ago put into place. I elaborated this. The outcome is that anybody contemplating that CHP facility and applying that generation to within the 2-mile radius, you're just not going to be able to do that anymore. There's another rule out there that involves what's known as the default service provider. In today's world, in Pennsylvania at least, we're still predominantly, if you have not chosen to shop for your electricity supply from a non-regulated electric distribution company, you're still with the EDCs, and what we refer to as the provider of last resort, or POLR, they still have that responsibility. The Commission, however, is bent on weaning us off our electric distribution company, and they've created this new term called the default service provider, who would bid or would take possession of accounts through an auction process and become their electric generation supplier. This is an ill-conceived, tried before and failed approach to forcing customers to shop for electricity, but they're back at it. And one of the things that competitive generation providers don't have to do is provide net metering. So they're setting this rule up to say that they can force you away from your electric distribution company into to be a customer of someone who you've never made a decision to do business with, and you're going to like it, and they're going to provide you net metering. They have to provide you net metering if you're a qualifying customer generator. So what's the outcome of that? You're going to be customers will be in a lottery to find out who their generation provider is, and some will win the luck of the draw and get a good one, and others will end up getting the booby prize, and this isn't going to be a good thing for people who want to take advantage of net metering. So this is a risk. This builds in risk into the marketplace. So where you prior to this could make decisions based on the understanding that you will be able to deal in the retail electricity world, this kind of throws that into question. You won't know who your DSP will be. You don't know what their financial standing is, their ability to do and conduct business over the long haul is, and it will increase the risk of going out and putting together any kind of a biomass combined heat and power generation project because it just throws in uncertainty that really you don't need in this market. And then finally, the commissions that now inserted themselves as judge and jury in part of this process if these rules become the law of the land. And what they are saying here is that if you want, for any facility that has greater than 500 kW or 1/2 a megawatt of generation capacity, you first need to jump through the hoops for the commission to make sure that you meet all those other requirements that that we've just talked about, and once you are blessed by the commission, then you would be able to go ahead and build your project. Now, just think about that in the time involved with locating a site, putting together a business plan, locating a site, doing some preliminary prospecting on the finance side of things, making sure you have an off-taker of heat or energy if that's your business model, and you're also intending to sell electricity to the grid. But now that we've got our plan all assembled, let's get in the queue and wait for the commission to bless our project before we can actually move into action and build the project, get into business. It's just another layering of a risk. It's a injection of regulation where, in my opinion, the commission has no right to intervene, and it will definitely not help the folks in Pennsylvania move forward to achieve their 8% reduction in the use of fossil fuels replaced by renewable energy by the year 2021. So I will pause there and open the floor up for questions and discussions. I know I touched on a lot of different areas, and they probably run together in the brief 45 minutes that we were sharing this. But let's have questions and discussion here.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Please type in your questions. I'll kick it off with a comment question, I guess, is your cumulative concerns about the Commission's actions sound like and you try to phrase it that you don't really know why they're doing it, but surely there's a bias against renewables. So it sounds to me like they're still in the lobby of fossil fuel people. Is that something I could?
Well, we've spent, as I said, we've been looking at this issue for about the past 5 months. Among the circles I run in, of course, there's a lot of people involved in renewables, and so there's a natural. I have to say that the group has a natural bias against the fossil industry. They believe they're of the mind that the fossil industry, and I'll leave this to the your own interpretation, receives a lot of subsidies, that they are in bed with the legislature and the politicos in general. And let's face it, the electric distribution companies, as they're structured nowadays, have had long histories of procuring and using fossil fuels to produce electricity, and and as it stands today, the vast majority of the electricity consumed in all of our states still comes from fossil fuels. So yeah, I mean, you got to say there is a bias, but there's also a law on the books that said that they need to set that bias aside. I would also say, with regard to that commissions, the complexion or the tone of a public utility commission will change over time based on the occupant of the governor's residence. The governor is largely responsible for appointing the commissioners, and while the legislature approves them, but the tone that gets set in each commission, which changes over time, does have its origins in the governor's office. And I've seen we call it a pendulum. I've seen the pendulum swing in the 25 years I've been involved, or over 30 now, looking at these realities. I've seen the pendulum swing many times, and I think right now in Pennsylvania we've reached the apex in the other one direction. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, it's not very promising. But we don't know how long Corbett's going to be here. So, all right, do you understand Barry's question? Is
Yeah,
this a house?
is it a house rule? And these the House has not, the legislature has not had anything to say about revising or tweaking the original law. There was actually, the way they proceed, if they want to correct an error in an existing piece of law, they'll pass an amendment, or they'll pass a law that changes that language. This is the commission acting on its own, and there have been freedom of information inquiries done, served on the commission to try and explore where what the internal talk about these proposals has been, and the people I know who have done that have found no direct linkage to, one might think, the utilities had something to do with this, to the utilities. So they're either very good at covering the tracks, or this is commission initiated. And Dan's saying that at $1 billion a year market, A lot of people would see that as plenty of room to for many and more players, and I agree with you. But it's this doesn't this facilitate that market though. This cuts people out of the market. This makes people stand back and scratch their head and look at the dollars they have to invest and say, I might be able to find a safer place to invest this with a more likely guaranteed return.
Okay.
Um,
Felipe's.
Seems like it's a hostile environment. I have to agree with you, and it moves. Having been involved really with renewables since I'm going to say 1980, and we had many dry years. Hence my 25-year career in electric utilities. I thought we'd finally turned the corner. But this legislation, I thought, put us over the top that we'd arrived. But now I'm seeing this brick by brick dismantling of this great facade we had built for renewables. And one of the things I did not mention is that anybody has that we are in what is referred to as a 30-day comment period, and we encourage anybody that has a position on fostering renewables, in particular in Pennsylvania or within your own state. The 30-day window is open right now in Pennsylvania to let the commission know what you think about their proposed rules. And we have spent much time in the 5 months preceding this actual publication in the Pennsylvania Record, encouraging people to develop their thoughts and get them on paper so that we kind of create a deluge of commenting on the negative nature of these proposed rules. Dan's asking, are the EDCs stuck with costly paperwork? And I would 2 points there is that if you are a forward-thinking company, you look to your IT world, your IT department, to automate what has become a costly paper chase within the EDCs. However, the EDCs, as I said, are they're regulated monopolies. They have monopoly business status, which is rare in the business world, and they are guaranteed a rate of return. Not only are they guaranteed a rate of return, they're guaranteed recovery, full cost recovery of anything they spend to make this renewable portfolio legislation work. So on the books, they are made whole. That doesn't mean that walking down the hall or standing around the water fountain in their offices, they don't hate doing this work. They still get paid for doing it, and they're not taking a loss, and their shareholders are all covered too. And Barry's asking, are they creating a monopoly then by limiting rights of consumers? It depends on how far they go with dismantling this. Before we either end up with denailed, with a declawed legislation that has little capacity to move forward. If that's where we end up, then yeah, they have limited the rights of the consumers. And Zane's asking, with these negative rules, um, is the only viable future sticking to on-farm applications, or doing things like uh, merely pelletizing biomass and selling it as a retail heat source? I hope we don't end up there, Zane, because um, uh, we miss tremendous opportunities to advance the technology, the combustion and boiler technologies. To one of the um, technology things that I didn't spend any time on is that the inverter technology that's out there now, the technology that's able to interconnect with the utility grid and safely supplied clean and reliable, and by clean I mean free of distortion and well-regulated sine wave and computer-friendly electricity from small distributed generation plants. That technology has come a long way in the last 10 to 15 years, and now it readily supports uh, doing smaller distributed generation facilities out amongst the countryside that allows you to position the generation facility, the heat or the combined heat and power plant, close to the fuel source, and use the wires for transportation. So that technology's come a long way, and if what we end up being is uh, a bunch of densifying operations that are making pellets, that would be a royal crime. Okay. Any other on that?
Anyone else? Last call. Great presentation. It's um, something we have to keep on our radar screen and see what we can do about it. It definitely does put a damper on our efforts in a way, but interesting to look at what other states do as well and see how what lessons we can learn from other states, and maybe use them as models, or maybe they're worse. So there's a lot to be learned. But then you also talk about how it depends on the political climate and who's in power at the time.
Right, but the original renewable portfolio legislation was many years in the making. It was a passage of it through the legislature was a large effort. Uh, on the other side of that, I would say that once laws like this are on the books, they're very hard to remove. The law is still the law, and you know, dismantling a renewable energy piece of legislation would is not would not be received well by the public in general. So you take that out. I put a lot of faith in the fact that the law was on the books.
Right.
But what we're seeing here is the dismantling of what the what the legislative intent was, and that the use of the commission's or the commission's use of that verbiage really tells you what they're up to, in that they're reinterpreting what a commission with a different a commission of a different composition, tone, or complexion, what their original interpretation was is now being rejiggered by the current leadership and majority of the commission.
Yep, sounds like it. Dan has a couple more comments there. I see. I know we're running out of time, but um, lots of food for thought, and we can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, we don't we don't lobby on any of this stuff as Penn State. So
Right.
but this is where we rely on people who work with us, or people we support, to be our voice out there. And because Dan's talking about uh, eliciting bipartisan support, you have to be careful about doing that. But there are many vehicles uh, in the public domain that can take your message or our message and carry it for us.
All right. Well, that's a good note to end on. I thank you for giving us this presentation. Very
Hey,
informative.
I appreciate the
I,
opportunity to share with you, because this stuff's kind of off many people's radar screens.
right, and I think it needs a wider audience perspective. And as you can see, Sarah has noted that this is recorded, so it will be available online at our new bio website. And thanks everyone